Hi there, BookTube.
Good afternoon, readers. It's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and I have with me Ros
from Scully Learning About the Books.
One of the hosts of Victober this year, along with Katie, Kate, Marissa, and Petra. Did I get them all? Yes. And we're here for a Victober themed tag. We've just recorded Ros's version on Ros's channel.
And now you can have Tilly's version on Tilly's channel.
So we're interviewing each other. So
and I
get
to ask the questions this time.
Yes, and she gets to interrupt me instead of me the other way around.
That's great. So, question number 1, Tilly.
Should we just quickly say this is the Victorian Literature Journey Tag, but it was developed from the Shakespeare Journey Tag, which was created for Shakespeare, last month's read-along of Shakespearean works.
Thank you, Jason and Kelly and Nicole for giving us the okay to do an
adapted version,
a Victober adaptation of the Shakespeare Journey.
Because I really enjoyed seeing different stories of how people had kind of wound up where we are now in our reading journeys.
Yeah. So, what was your first experience reading Victorian literature? What was it like?
So I've got, I suppose, a similar story of getting into Victorian literature as you did. And that was as a child. You and your mum, my grandma, who was alive at the time, read Victorian stories to me when I was little. And the absolute best was one called Family Troubles, which we've just looked up now. It's by Mrs. Molesworth, and it was written in 1890. It is a really gorgeous picture book. And it's about Old Father Time and his children are all of the months of the year. And it's about them having a dispute. And some of the children go off and they don't come in their right order, and they're just, oh no, it's been the end of one month, we don't have the next month ready, so that the next month randomly comes in and all the weather goes completely wild. And it's a book that I still think about today, because when the weather in October feels like it should be the weather in May, then I'm always thinking it's Old Father Time's kids are having an argument,
having a bit of a squabble and misbehaving.
Yeah. So that was a very early Victorian story that I can remember kind of looking through at Grandma's house and looking at all the pictures, and one that I look forward to sharing with my own family in future. The first Victorian novel that I remember reading as a sort of critical reader, as a reader old enough to think for myself and make my own decisions on what I was reading, was Jane Eyre, and that was thanks to the 2006 BBC adaptation, so I would have been about 12. And I remember watching the first episode and not wanting it to end. It ends on a dramatic scene, flames everywhere and things, and you being there at me being like, I don't want it to end, and you being like, well, why don't you go and just read the book? You can read it, it's just on the shelf, just give it a try. And before the next episode came out, I'd finished the book. So I don't know whether that was the next day or the next week, but anyway, I just went there and read it, and that started the whole.
It would have been the next week, because that's how TV worked in those days.
Oh, yeah,
you couldn't
you couldn't just stream the whole thing.
So it gave you a week to read it, so that was good.
It was enough.
Okay. Prompt number 2. Has the reading of a Victorian book ever brought you to tears? If so, tell us more.
So unlike you said you're not a tearful reader. I am, and I am an increasingly tearful reader, I would say, the older I get, weirdly. And quite a lot of Victorian literature, I think, has made me cry. I could probably list at least 4 Hardys that make me cry. Most particularly, I would mention the very last scene of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, the absolute last page, which is
no spoilers.
Crying now.
No spoilers, but yes, that I might have cried at that too.
And there's one particular moment in Far From the Madding Crowd. It's just the 2 words "with child," and I just remember that. Anyway, poetry as well. So Tennyson and Swinburne are 2 that I can particularly remember crying at certain poems.
Very moving. Yeah. Prompt number 3. Are there any people that have played a significant role in your Victober journey?
Well, present company aside, having already mentioned the Jane Eyre moment, my biggest one, I'd say, would be my English teacher at college, who was called Sean. He was absolutely fantastic, very engaged and enthusiastic, and just very acute and very precise at his subject. So that was the first time that I read Tess and the D'Urbervilles critically. I'd read it before, I think actually twice, just for myself because I loved it so much. And then we had it as a set text. And just reading that critically and understanding the craft of Victorian literature and the levels of symbolism and allusion and the themes that Hardy was working on, like my appreciation for Victorian literature as a genre massively increased. He also ran an optional additional book club, which was my first experience reading Our Mutual Friend, which I've since read again thanks to Victober. And yeah, that's another of my favourite Victorian books. So to have him as a teacher was just fantastic at that age.
And that's lovely because a lot of people say, they were put off Victorian literature because of experiences, bad teaching. You know. We won't say the teachers were bad, but
but a bad setup.
Bad curriculum maybe.
Interestingly, a lot of my classmates who hadn't read Tess before that class didn't like it, and I think they didn't come to it with the love that I had already. But,
interesting.
I don't think that was Sean's fault.
Question number 4. Do you have a favourite film or TV adaptation of a Victorian book? And is there one that you'd like to see made?
Going back to Hardy again, he's not the only Victorian novelist that I read, but I particularly like the 2015 adaptation of Far From the Madding Crowd. It's got Kerry Mulligan as Bathsheba Everdeen. I love that book because it's got a really gripping female heroine who does try her best. And I think that film, it's beautifully shot and it captures some of the modern emotions of the story without changing it too much from the original. One I would like to see adapted. I can't believe that there doesn't seem to be a modern adaptation of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall.
No, and that it's got a lot of modern themes that you could really draw out, hasn't it?
And sort of every year I kind of appreciate more how important a novel The Tenant of Wildfell Hall should be, and we've got so many adaptations of Jane Eyre, and that's fantastic because I love Jane Eyre,
but you don't need another. Why do we endlessly get Jane Eyre and Great Expectations and not The Tenant of Wildfell Hall? Which has got some actual really good cinematic moments in it, I think, and some characters that would be great to build.
No,
you're absolutely right. Thinking of characters, which character in Victorian literature most resembles you, or do you identify with most?
It's such a difficult question, isn't it? Because a lot of the characters that you perhaps could say you identify with then make some horrible mistakes that you don't want to be associated with. Think you Bathsheba, not to
again, no spoilers, but I know what you mean.
Or they're just a bit too perfect, like somebody like Margaret Hale in North and South. I love that book. But
and
as a character,
identify with her, but she's too good, isn't she?
She's a little bit on the perfect side.
Esther Summerson, cast
true,
too good.
Because there were certain ideals that they had to meet, I suppose, and a lot of these are male authors, if you think about it, and writing a woman who's perhaps not fully realised. And then likewise, Jane Eyre, I really did feel like I identified her. I identified with her when I was 14 or 15, but I don't. And her sense, particularly her sense of wanting to gain her independence, I don't really feel that so much now. But I found one.
Did you?
I currently feel like I can relate to the narrator of Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, because she's like this. She feels she's a bit of an outsider figure to this village, and she's in an area where there's mostly women, and I work in a mostly female profession, and she's kind of half observing, half participating in the little kind of day-to-day intrigues of the town, and I kind of I can see that position quite well.
Ooh, that's a nice one. Do you have a favourite moment or scene or line from Victorian literature?
So many, so many.
We've got to pick one.
But you do have to pick one. And one that I would mention is in Bleak House. There's a moment with Esther Summerson when she first looks at her reflection after an illness. That's one I talked about at length in a video I made last year about
disfigurement.
Facial scarring and things in Victorian literature. That resonated with me because of my work, but one that sticks with me, and I kind of almost know it off by heart, is a poem by Tennyson called Crossing the Bar, and I'll just read the first stanza. Sunset, an evening star, and one clear call for me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. And it's a poem about death and dying, and I love poems about death and dying.
And Tennyson, nobody does it better.
Yeah. So that's a poem that sticks with me and that I think about.
Lovely. Does any Victorian literature intimidate you? Could be, author, works, types.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like it didn't. When I was 15, nothing intimidated me. And I started trying to read Middlemarch, and I realised I was out of my depth.
I did try to put you off, didn't I? I did say, no,
don't read that yet.
Don't read that yet. It's like, oh no, I can read anything.
Yeah, couldn't read Middlemarch. George Eliot, I've got a really poor record with. I like Silas Marner, but I've got 3 DNFs by George Eliot. I couldn't finish Romola, I couldn't finish Middlemarch, and I haven't yet managed to finish The Mill on the Floss. But I'm determined to conquer that this year, and I've just restarted The Mill on the Floss. I have managed, I think, one more chapter than I've managed so far. So yeah, George Eliot is my little my nemesis.
Whereas she's my favourite. Although
I know that you love her so much.
Mill on the Floss, not my favourite.
Oh, maybe it was a bad choice.
Yeah.
I know she's so loved, and I did love Silas Marner, but I
wish you were reading Adam Bede rather than Mill on the Floss.
It's the one that I had. It was in my pile.
There you go.
And Trollope, I do get a little bit worried about Trollope, which is a difficult one.
Readable.
I've only read The Warden, and I did enjoy The Warden, but they're just so chunky.
Yeah, but they read faster.
Yeah, like Dickens.
I
don't see Dickens books as being chunky anymore because I know how quickly they read.
Yeah, well, Trollope's the same. Yeah, and slightly less exaggerated. Yeah, more realist.
Anyway, I'm going to try with The Way We Live Now.
Oh, good. Problem number 8. What tips would you give to someone who's early on in their Victorian literature journey?
I would say start small. Don't go for the big names just because they're the big names. So what I see a lot of people doing is saying, this is my first year reading Victorian literature, I'm going to read Wuthering Heights and Dracula. And those are 2 books from the extremes of Victorian literature. And both of them are quite challenging in their own way. And I'm not saying don't read a book that you want to read just because it's going to be challenging. But if you are just interested in dipping your toe in Victorian literature, Wuthering Heights is not a very good place to start because it's a very strange book.
Profoundly odd book.
It'll give you a very weird impression of Victorian literature if your one experience is Wuthering Heights, particularly if you can't get through it, which when you hit the dialogue parts, you might struggle. Not that I'm underestimating your ability as somebody starting Victorian literature, but I would say, they did some fantastic short stories. If you work with what you like, and if you like detective novels, go for Sherlock Holmes. If you like romance, go for North and South. And the Victorian era is so long that you've got a lot to choose from. So if you already like Jane Austen type stuff, read something from the start of the Victorian era, like 1830s type time. If you're more familiar with sort of modern writing, the stuff that was written in sort of the 1890s does read quite modern. Like something like The Picture of Dorian Gray is much very familiar to read.
Yes. It doesn't feel as alien as something like Wuthering Heights. Although not that we're saying don't read Wuthering Heights because
eventually
everyone should. Yes. Last prompt. What book or other work is your top recommended read for other readers of Victorian fiction, Victorian literature?
My most commonly recommended one is Jane Eyre, just because I loved it so much. So I've pushed it into many hands, metaphorically, recommended it. And now, these days, my most recommended one is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, because if anyone comes to me and says, I've read Jane Eyre and I loved it, I say, well, you need to read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall next.
And in some ways, it's less problematic than Jane Eyre. In its sort of ultimate resolution and message. And for a modern woman reading it today.
So that's the one I now kind of step to and say this is the undervalued one from the 80s, because it's Jane Eyre but kind of flipped in a way, which makes it interesting.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So the final prompt is to tag people.
Yes, and I really meant to actually look up some names, because I think it's much more effective if you do look up, if you do have names to tag. But I would like to tag some of the people who are in the Victober Discord specifically, because we've got a couple of people who've been in the Discord who've dropped a TBR video or something like that. If you're in the Victober Discord chat and you've been sharing some videos in there, then I tag you to do this and to share that as well.
And actually, what you could do is put some people's names in the description.
Yes.
Yeah. So as to link to their channels, which is always good.
Yeah. And if you're not on the Discord, I think we have I think you as Victober host, you're now hosting 500 people discussing Victorian literature.
Which is always a joy. And then there's another load of people discussing it in the Goodreads group.
Yeah. So, just for me, I find Discord so much easier.
So much easier. Yeah. More, you get more to and fro with Discord. Yeah. So, happy Victober, everybody. Do the tag, and we'll see you on another video soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching.